Hey everybody, it's Cory from CoryBakerFilmmaker.com, and I just saw On the Basis of Sex, written by Daniel Stiepleman and directed by Mimi Leader. Caught this flick at the Regal LA Live, the old usual. Everyone else was going to go see Glass. I hadn't seen any of the previous movies, so I decided to take on On the Basis of Sex instead. And yeah, great theater, great time. Go check out a movie at Regal LA Live if you haven't already. On to the flick. This story basically tells sort of the the law school to post-law school era of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, leading up to the first time that she would argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. It doesn't actually go all the way to said argument. It just sort of tells the story up until that point. And there's a lot of things that happened throughout this movie that were clearly, it was very much of women being treated like second-class citizens, and Felicity Jones playing Ruth Bader Ginsburg sort of going through with it, but obviously there being a overwhelming sense that something is not right here, and it basically leads to a case brought by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, her husband Martin, and the ACLU to get the same rights for a man that a woman would get as a basis for future cases, which would allow for women who were being treated as second-class citizens to have a precedent set for their cases. So if you could win a case where a man is being persecuted as opposed to a woman, then a decision in that case could help translate into a woman being persecuted in the man's role going forward in legal statute. So up front, I really, really enjoyed this flick. I mean, personally speaking, I've always been a fan of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I think that she is just in U.S. jurisprudence, she's one of the icons. And one of these days, and I say this sort of regardless of politics. I know that in this in this day, it's so hard not to tie everything to the team sport aspect of it, with the liberals and the Republicans and Democrats, just down the line. Like, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, despite what you might think of her decisions and where she comes from on her rulings and stuff like that, has been fighting the fight for as long as there possibly can. And I just don't understand how you would necessarily argue with that point. And this movie sort of speaks to that, and it speaks to the character that she's shown for longer than we've known her as a Supreme Court justice. Now, this movie, too, is supposed to line up with the 25-year anniversary of when RBG went on to the Supreme Court. So it sort of all ties together at this nice little moment, and it's truly a wonderfully acted film. If I could, if I were to cast a movie myself, I would have a hard time not eventually coming to the people that they came to in this flick as well. Felicity Jones, one of my favorites, Armie Hammer, who I loved in The Social Network. I didn't see Call Me By Your Name. I missed it. I don't know how it happened. Justin Theroux was really good in that. Sam Waterston, always one of my favorites. Kathy Bates and Stephen Root. I haven't had the opportunity to go on this yet, but I think Stephen Root is one of our more talented actors, not only in drama but in comedy. And he's one of those guys he's one of those I've seen his face before kind of guys. Not many people recognize him by name, but he's been in so many great things, and he always brings it. And I'm so glad that he had the opportunity to sort of take not a leading role, but like a strong supporting role in this movie. It was a wonderful job. So immediately, hats off to Victoria Thomas, who was the casting director on the flick, because it personally spoke to me as to the as somebody who appreciates incredible acting, and I think that everyone in this flick really nailed it. Like it was amazing. On the actual movie, I won't say that this movie is incredibly deep or complex or anything of the sort. It's a wonderful piece. It's not fluff. I want to put that. It's not like just like a biopic fluff, but it is. It does that thing that a lot of biopics do, which is we've created our hero, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and her faults are only going to be that of a system beyond her control. So she is going to be talked down to amongst males at Harvard. She's going to try and transfer to Columbia to finish, but she wants a Harvard degree, something that's happened to other men in the past. But the dean of Harvard Law is not going to allow that to happen for Ruth. And, her husband gets sick, and she has to do not only her classwork, but his classwork, and raise the kid. All of these things, which are not like, it's not like Ruth Bader Ginsburg had a drug problem and now we're looking at her in a bathroom high or something like that. All the things are sort of pressed up against her, as opposed to things that were caused by actions of her choosing. And, it's sort of, it's for a movie like this, where you're trying to tell like sort of the true story behind it and the greatness of it, it's easy to sort of avoid somebody's personal foibles and problems. And it's not even like I'm necessarily asking for them to shoehorn this sort of thing in. It's just sort of like, as far as a narrative piece, it can be difficult when everything is wonderful. So, just from the last year, another biopic that we had was Bohemian Rhapsody. And that movie did everything it possibly could to never show any member of Queen, Freddie Mercury or otherwise, in a negative light. And that movie had plenty of opportunities to do so, and it wouldn't have made us not like Freddie Mercury. It would have made us idealize with him even more, because we all have problems. Again, not saying that to shoehorn problems into this, but it's a very biopic-y kind of thing where you're doing the saint version of, you're doing Saint Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You're not doing Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the actual person. You're selecting your focus on a small little piece of it, and it makes it the whole thing complicated from a character development standpoint. All that being said, it's not breaking the mold on the biopic, but the biopic is a pretty simple formula. You get great actors, great writing, great director, you put it all together, and you hope for the best version of the movie you can possibly get. And I think that Mimi Leader and everyone else involved did a phenomenal job at just the actual act of creating a good movie. I mean, it's a touchstone I come back to because it's so outrageously difficult. It's hard to make a good movie, and she doesn't really Mimi doesn't really have any struggles here. Like everyone from all the departments down does a fantastic job. They're all aces at what they're doing, and it's great. It's just it's hard to figure out a way to make a character endearing in the face of the personal problems that we all go through, while still shining the spotlight on them in the proper way. One thing I really did enjoy about how they did it, though, was being very selective in the focus. So, not making a movie where we're aging up Felicity Jones so that we can also see her confirmation hearing for getting into the Supreme Court or anything like that. This is very selectively focused. And going back to the review on Vice I did, that is something that I think works better a lot of times for biopics than sort of doing the whole life. So, in Vice, we start with Dick Cheney had just married Lynn Cheney, but he's the fuck up in the middle of the oil fields of Wyoming or a lineman or something like that. I can't quite remember. And it goes all the way until current day. I mean, it takes a lot. You're trying to fit a lot of things into the story, and you're trying to make it all work in 2 hours. It's much easier if you go on the basis of sex route and say, okay, we're focusing on RBG from age 25 to age 30, maybe, maybe a 5-year span. And I keep finding myself saying to people when talking about biopics, I sort of appreciate it when you can do sort of just moments of, because it's so much easier to create the characters based off of this specific moment where, you might have, if you want a singing competition or a beauty pageant or, placed first in a 5K or the New York City Marathon or something like that. The movie version of that would be just that time period. It would be you training for the marathon and you winning the marathon, and maybe the things that happen. You hurt your ankle a month before the race started and you didn't know whether or not you were going to make it. All these little things tell the more interesting version of the story than going, I was born young in Lexington, Kentucky, and now I'm running the New York City Marathon and nobody thought I could do it. It just takes too long to get to that point, and you lose the little bits of human piece that happen throughout. And this movie, while it doesn't ever talk about RBG as a faulted person, which we all are. I'm not trying to cast aspersions. I'm just saying it does a good job of keeping it compact enough that we don't feel like we're missing it that much. A couple last second thoughts on it. As far as things that I feel like the movie could have improved upon a little bit, it was a little bit tropey at times with the feel of a rising score at these big moments, and it felt a little bit too cinematic and a little bit too forced. It's not this movie overall is very enjoyable. It's a wonderful time, and I think that it never takes you out of it. But I mean, sort of as trying to do something remarkable, it felt a little bit like what we have seen before. It felt a little bit like we're going off the playbook, which I would have liked a little. I wouldn't have minded it stretch its legs a bit and try things out. The other thing is, and this might just be, you run out of time, you run out of money, post problems, but there were a couple times where there's a long tracking shot that sort of looks like it comes in and out of a speed ramp, and maybe that they shot it on a 4K Alexa or something like that, and they're trying to sort of do a zoom within the resolution as opposed to a zoom with the actual lens, and just some of those things are noticeable. But again, that's probably just me being a film person and noticing these things a lot more than other people. But I mean, it feels like you could have, if they had an extra week to play with it, they could have fine-tuned that a little bit. But it's nothing to not see the movie over. It's just me talking. All rise for the leaderboard. Saw this movie at Regal LA Live. Wonderful time. Go check it out. Onto the movie leaderboard. So I wouldn't say that this movie is an Oscar contender, at least Best Picture Oscar contender. It's very good. It's very enjoyable, but it's just not that good. It's just a shade below. I mean, I wouldn't have picked Bohemian Rhapsody as Best Picture winner or a Best Picture nominee either. So, maybe it's on the edges. I like this movie better than I liked Bohemian Rhapsody. So I would definitely would not be surprised if something were to come through. I would definitely not be surprised if acting gets a couple nominations at some point in the next year's Oscars. The problem is it's so far away. It's literally been released in like the first week of January of 2019, so it becomes difficult to think about it as a awards contender for the 2020 Oscars when it's going to have to fight a whole bunch of things that come out later. But needless to say, I would definitely just give a nod though to Felicity Huffman, Armie Hammer, in particular. They were both incredibly wonderful. The movie on a whole though, I would give On the Basis of Sex a 7.4. Very fun, very enjoyable. If you have someone in your life who doesn't know much about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, this might be a good way to get them involved. It's a way more digestible version of somebody's life than sort of like the RBG documentary, which I loved too. I enjoyed very thoroughly, but documentaries can get a little bit in the mud about it, and this one is just an easy breezy biopic, and it feels like it would be more acceptable for your sort of average moviegoer. Anyway, that's it from me. If you want more, you can go to my website, CoryBakerFilmmaker.com, Facebook.com/CoryBakerFilm, at LegendCB5 on Twitter and Instagram. If you like this review, give it a thumbs up. If you have comments, put them down below. I respond to every single comment. I'm going to try and see sort of the last couple films that I haven't seen for the 2019 Oscars coming up here, so Green Book and The Favorite will be coming up soon, but if there's other things you want me to see, review here in this platform, just let me know, and I'd be happy to go check it out. Anywho, that's it for me. Now, if you don't mind, I have to find a good test case in order to set precedent for future movie reviews.